If you're paying attention, you've probably noticed that your money just does not stretch like it used to. 5 years ago, you could walk out of a grocery store with a cart for under $100, but now you can double that. The obvious answer is inflation, but that's kind of boring and surface level, so let's go a little deeper. I want to know why the headlines tell me inflation is under control when it really doesn't feel like it in real life. To set the stage, though, we need some background. Let's time travel back to the 1970s. A family walks into a grocery store with just enough cash for the week, but as they grab their milk, their bread, their eggs, their meat, last month's $10 grocery bill is now $15. Their money is shrinking in real time. Fast forward to today, different family, very different world, but the same feeling. And this time we're in a McDonald's drive-through with a $50 charge on our credit card. Prices jump and your paycheck doesn't, and still headlines keep telling you inflation is under control. How can inflation look low on paper, but both of the families feel very broke in real life? This video isn't just about rising prices. I know you know that. So stay with me here because I'm going to show you how the government rigs the numbers to make inflation look lower, and it might make you a little angry, so please don't shoot the messenger. The Federal Reserve says its job is to keep inflation steady at 2% a year. But if you've been paying for food, gas, lunch, anything lately, you know it doesn't feel like 2%. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that the Consumer Price Index, basically the price on everyday items, has climbed 25% in 5 years. On paper, that's not catastrophic, but here's where the numbers break from reality. Take the McChicken. Back in 2019, it was just around $1.30. Today, it's around $3.20. That's a 150% jump in 6 years. And maybe using a McChicken for the example is a little cheesy, but it matters more than you think. Put yourself in the shoes of that family. The $10 drive-through stop that used to be a budget meal now eats a big slice of your paycheck. But in the 1970s, the families were saying the same exact thing. Just swap that McChicken for the bread or the milk. So why does CPI make inflation look mild when the lived experience is just brutal? Because CPI is an average across tens of thousands of goods. Big price hikes get buried under cheaper categories, and the pain you feel in your wallet just gets averaged away. And this is where it gets sketchy. The Federal Reserve isn't just tracking these numbers, they're steering their policy based off of them. So if they're calculating it wrong, that can affect us in real life. So that begs the question, who and what is the Fed? Well, the organization controlling your money isn't even fully government. It's not a full government agency. Private banks technically own parts of the Federal Reserve, and you can thank its inception to private bankers as well in 1913. Despite all of that, the idea behind it is still sound. Keep inflation and unemployment low so people live their lives. But when the Federal Reserve prints money and subsequently raise rates after to combat that, it's basically a hidden tax where your savings shrink and your purchasing power just erodes away. And that's the story of the father in the 1970s looking at his checkbook. That's the family in the drive through. That's you. That's me. We're all involved in this equation here. The difference is large amounts of wealth can protect itself from inflation. People with assets can ride out inflation. Everybody else gets squeezed out by inflation. There's no safety net, there's no cushion, you're just losing money. Being low income and poor is a circular trap. You don't have any money, so you don't have any money to invest, so you don't make any more money. So when inflation hits, it's really tough on low income, the poorest in society, and the middle class. But the Federal Reserve just has one job here: lie to you about inflation. And here's where the statistical magic happens. CPI used to be simple. In the 1970s, they tracked a fixed basket of items like bread, gas, rent. Prices went up, CPI went up. Pretty straightforward. But in the 1990s, someone had a brilliant idea if they could make inflation look smaller without actually lowering prices. Introduce substitution bias. If steak hits $20 a pound and you avoid it because it's so pricey, CPI assumes you'll switch to the hamburger and call it good. On paper, no inflation problem because you're still eating meat, so it's still counted. In reality, you've downgraded, but the stats make it look like a voluntary switch. But both families have the same result here: less money, fewer choices, and officials falsely celebrate controlled inflation. The way that they calculate it now is not mathematically wrong, but it just fails to reflect reality. And the Fed can't tame inflation without risking economic collapse. They have to raise rates to slow the demand for dollars, but this risks recession So every decision is a trade off. But you have to ask yourself, how did we even get to this position in the first place where they have to raise rates, they have to fight inflation? They're basically hurting you and then giving you a band aid and calling it good. But the Fed has something called a dual mandate. Imagine your job was to keep unemployment low and prices stable. This creates an impossible choice: protect the savers or protect the debtors. With the value of our national debt at 120% the size of our GDP, inflation acts as a stealth transfer from citizens' wallets to the government, while they repay old obligations in cheaper dollars. In that equation, savers will always lose and the government will always win. That 1970s family lived through something called the Volcker shock, when rates hit 20% and mortgages soared past 15%. Our modern family doesn't face those 20% rates, but housing is still essentially the same amount of unaffordability, and our wages have lagged far behind the 1970s level. And we see it's a different decade, but it's the same outcome. This is a structural problem, not a temporary crisis, as it's always framed. And then there's politics. No side of the aisle wants to stop the train because spending money wins them elections. Look at France just this month. Former Prime Minister Francois Bayrou presented 44 billion in cuts to the government, and they saw massive protests. In the US, we're staring down another government shutdown over 2026 spending battles. The political system incentivizes short-term appeasement over long-term stability, which means inflationary pressure will persist because politicians are rewarded for keeping the money flowing, not preserving our purchasing power. But this is the part that they don't want you to know. If we calculated inflation using the same method from the 1970s, today's manageable 2 to 3% would actually be around 8 to 10%. The government didn't solve inflation, they changed how they counted it. Suddenly, inflation looked pretty good. It was low. But Social Security payments, federal pensions, veteran benefits, tax brackets, all of this is tied to the official CPI number. Every single percentage point the government shaves off inflation saves them tens of billions of dollars per year. The same government that owes you a cost of living adjustment is the one deciding how much cost of living actually went up. They aren't neutral arbiters of truth. They designed it to minimize what they owe you. So when officials celebrate that they beat inflation, shrug that off. They didn't beat anything. They moved the goalposts and made you pay the price for it. Politicians inflate our debt and then campaign on saving it. Corporations raise their prices faster than wages and they increase their profits exponentially. Remember that McChicken? Well, it jumped 150%, but do you think the McDonald's workers' wages also jumped 150%? Not even close. Productivity grows, prices rise, but wages stagnate. And the people doing the labor shoulder the burden of inflation and the corporate profit seeking. Say what you want about whether a fast food worker should be able to earn a living wage or not, but if you can't find another job that pays more, what are you supposed to do? Are you just supposed to accept the fact that you're going to be making the bare minimum for the rest of your life? Since 1980, workers' productivity rose 70% and wages only 12%. We are 70% more productive than our parents in terms of the dollar value output, and we're getting paid with pretend money. And corporations laugh all the way to the bank with record profits. Shareholders are happy, and families fall further and further behind. Meanwhile, real government debt goes down. $1 trillion debt shrinks when it's measured against an inflated GDP, and families still get no relief. When the government gets to pay less on their debt, our mortgages and our rents still don't shrink. Sometimes they even go up. This is essentially the redistribution of money through the economy without legislation. And this is benefiting the institutions and punishing the citizens. You, me, and both of those families are on the losing side of this equation. We see headlines like stock market at all-time highs, record corporate earnings, and we question why our life feels so much different than that. It's a paradox in the way that they frame it. On the outside, it seems like the economy is healthy, while our individual well-being just erodes away. And the real cruel part is that the system is not broken, it's working as intended, and we get to foot the bill. These metrics I've talked about here today are not to measure our quality of life, they're to support an economic or a political narrative. Inflation isn't just some neutral being that comes from nowhere and starts on its own. It's a policy choice made by those in government, paid for by the taxes from you. And the core of the economy may be bad, but stocks are near all time highs. So, how do we explain that? Well, with the trillions in new dollars that have flooded the system, the stock market is a representation of the decline in the dollar, not the increase in stocks. We just have so many dollars in the system that it has to go somewhere, and it's going into stocks. People are generally recognizing that they need to protect themselves. That's why stocks are going up. So, this inflation paradox exists because we're measuring the wrong things for the wrong people. So, understanding that gap, understanding the disconnect is the first step. And until those numbers can match what we see in real life, that paradox will continue. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you like the new whiteboard back there. I know I'm such a great artist. But if you want more troubling insights and breakdowns and stuff like that, make sure to subscribe and like, and take care.